All right, let's talk about Raheem Mostert. You guys remember Radio Raheem? Anyway, Raheem Mostert, running back for the 49ers. As you guys know, he's out for the season. And the initial reports is that he had an injury, and what was first being reported, he's had a crack in the cartilage. Okay, well, what does that mean? Okay, so here's your knee. Here's your kneecap. Here's your femur. Here's your tibia. Lining the bone inside the joint is cartilage, right? And that cartilage is there because you want a smooth surface for that joint to articulate with. Okay, now cartilage is a very interesting tissue. It's made up of mostly collagen, a bunch of proteins, and it gets its nutrition from the joint fluid, right? It doesn't have great blood supplies. There's not a bunch of blood vessels running through it, or from the underlying bone, right? So it's sitting on top of the bone, so it gets some from the bone, some from a lot from the joint fluid itself, right? So if you get a fissure in that cartilage, a crack in that cartilage, that's what they're talking about. And that happens from either acute trauma or repetitive trauma, which is, as you can imagine, what happens when you're a professional athlete in a very, very heavy-hitting sport like football. Lot of trauma to your knee. So that cartilage, as you can imagine, if you're just pounding on something long enough, it can start to delaminate because the cartilage is kind of built up in layers. It can start to delaminate. It can soften up. It can get a crack in it. So first thought was, oh, this might just be a little tear and a little crack in the cartilage, like they were saying. And usually when that happens, it depends on how stable or unstable that cartilage is, right? So if it's stable, you can just let it heal. Okay. If it's unstable, go around and you can trim around the edges of where that fracture happened, kind of smooth things out, provided it's not too big of a defect. Okay, so I imagine that's probably what Raheem was thinking, or that was thought might be going on when it seemed like he might just only be out for a bit and be able to get back in this season. Turns out that he has opted to go for a bigger surgery, which now says that this is probably even more than just a little crack in the cartilage. He probably has an osteochondral defect, or he has a very big cartilage lesion, right? So that cartilage, like I said, is attached to the bone. So stable, unstable is if that attachment to the bone is completely off, right? Or it's almost off, right? If the cartilage is good, you can actually stabilize it by putting an absorbable screw to hold that cartilage down, letting it heal, okay? If there's a big cartilage defect, you can go ahead, trim out the edges, which are loose, and do a technique called microfracture, right? So they take a little sharp awl, poke it into the bone, okay? And what that does is allow blood flow into that region. Now, you don't want that awl to go too far because you can stimulate that bone to overgrow, but I digress. Anyway, when that blood flow happens into that area, you have stem cells. Everybody knows the term stem cells. You may not know what they are, but it means cells that can grow into other things, right? So these stem cells will get into the area and they'll form fibrocartilage, which is not the same type of cartilage, but it fills it in, okay? And it takes the pain away that the person's having. It's not perfect, but it works. Kind of like these roads in California, you know, one of the richest states in the country. You know, if you've driven on the roads in California, especially the Bay Area, there are potholes all over the place. You can drive on that road, and as smooth as it may look, you can tell where the potholes were, even though they're filled in. And if you drive over them, you can still tell something happened there, right? So the same thing happens in a knee. When you do the microfracture technique, you fills in with fibrocartilage. It's not the same as the other articular cartilage, but it works, okay? Now, but again, that's also a smaller procedure. What I think he probably has is a large osteochondral defect, right? So big chunk of cartilage is missing, maybe even a little bit of bone underlying it, right? When that happens, they either have to do a transplant take cartilage from someplace else. So, like for instance, they can take the outside part of the femur where you don't have any weight bearing or much weight bearing. Take some plugs of bone and fit them into that defect, right? So that bone will have the cartilage overlying it. They prepare the area that has the defect in it, stick that bone, those cartilage plugs inside there. It's called an osteochondral transplant, autologous osteochondral transplant, autologous because it comes from the same individual. Put it aside there, put them in a brace, protected, weight bearing, and let it heal. So that's probably what's happening with Raheem. And he's going to be out for the season because you want that to heal. You can't have him go back to playing football right away until that's healed. So we'll see how it does. Oh, actually, the other thing they could have done is, if the defect's a little smaller, they can take cartilage cells, kind of make them into a little slurry, like a cartilage Slurpee, and squirt that into that defect. Okay, that's also that's called a chondrocyte transplant, and allow those cells to settle in, and that can do the trick. I think he probably is going to get the osteochondral defects, since they're saying much bigger surgery. That's about the biggest surgery you'd think about if it's a cartilage injury. So yeah, he's out for the season. Once that's healed up, we'll see how he does.